It was a sunny Saturday afternoon in Oakwood Hills. This place was a small, quiet neighborhood where houses sat close together, and kids played outside all the time. Nothing big or exciting ever happened here, at least, that's what everyone thought. The streets were lined with neat little homes, all with green lawns and flowers in the front. Birds chirped in the trees, and the air smelled like fresh grass and summer. It was the kind of day that made you want to run outside and have fun. In one of those houses lived a boy named Timmy Jackson. Timmy was 10 years old, and he was just a regular kid. His hair was always messy, sticking up in every direction like he just rolled out of bed. He had big, bright eyes full of dreams about flying high in the sky, maybe even becoming a pilot one day. Timmy loved anything that could fly. Kites, birds, planes, he couldn't get enough of them. But today, he wasn't dreaming about real planes. Nope. He was in his backyard, holding something small and simple, a paper plane. Timmy's backyard wasn't huge, but it was his favorite place. It had a wooden fence all around it, tall enough to keep nosy people from peeking in. There was a patchy lawn where the grass grew in funny clumps, and a big oak tree that dropped acorns everywhere. Timmy stood there, his sneakers crunching on the dry leaves, folding his paper plane with a big grin on his face. He'd made tons of these before, but this one felt special. He used a piece of bright white paper, and he'd drawn little red stripes on the wings with a marker. "This one's gonna fly far," he said to himself, his voice full of excitement. Inside the house, Timmy's mom, Sarah, stood by the kitchen window. She was washing dishes, her hands all soapy, but she kept sneaking peeks outside. Sarah had short brown hair and a kind smile, the kind that made you feel safe. She wore a blue t-shirt and jeans, nothing fancy, just regular mom clothes. When she saw Timmy toss his paper plane into the air, her smile got even bigger. She loved watching him play. It made her happy to see him so full of energy and imagination. The paper plane took off like a rocket. Timmy threw it hard, and it zoomed up into the blue sky. The wind caught it just right, and it soared high, higher than Timmy expected. It looped and twirled, the red stripes flashing in the sunlight. Timmy jumped up and down, clapping his hands. "Go, go, go," he cheered. The plane sailed over the big oak tree, then over the wooden fence that separated his yard from the neighbors. And that's when things got interesting. The plane didn't land in just any yard. Oh no. It floated right down into the garden of Mrs. Linda Grayson. Now, Linda wasn't like most neighbors. She wasn't the kind who waved hello or brought over cookies. Nope. Linda was different. She was the boss of the neighborhood, or at least, she acted like it. See, Oakwood Hills had something called an HOA. That's short for Homeowners Association, a group that makes rules about how your house and yard should look. And Linda? She was the queen of the HOA. Everyone listened to her because they were scared not to. Linda was tall and skinny, with sharp eyes that could spot trouble from a mile away. Her hair was always pulled back tight in a bun, and she wore fancy clothes, even when she was just watering her flowers. She loved rules more than anything. If your grass grew too long, like, even half an inch too long, she'd pull out a ruler, measure it, and send you a letter saying you'd get a fine. If your mailbox was a little crooked, fine. If your dog barked too loud, fine. Linda was always watching, always writing down notes, always ready to tell you what you did wrong. The other grown ups in Oakwood Hills didn't like her much. Behind her back, they called her HOA Karen. A Karen is what people call someone who's bossy and complains a lot, and Linda was the biggest Karen around. She had a big house with a perfect yard, no weeds, no mess, just rows of bright red roses and green bushes trimmed into perfect squares. To Linda, her yard was like a castle, and she was the queen protecting it. So when Timmy's paper plane landed right smack in the middle of her roses, it wasn't just a toy to her. To Linda, it was like an enemy attack. Timmy didn't know any of this yet. He was still in his yard, staring at the fence, wondering where his plane went. "Did it crash?" he mumbled, scratching his messy hair. He couldn't see over the fence, it was too tall, but he heard something. A loud, angry voice. "What is this?" it shouted. Timmy's eyes got wide. He knew that voice. Everyone in Oakwood Hills knew that voice. It was Linda. Sarah heard it too. She turned off the water in the sink, wiped her hands on a towel, and peeked out the window again. She saw Timmy standing there, looking worried, and she knew something was up. But Sarah didn't look scared. Nope. She looked calm. Maybe even a little amused. She opened the back door and stepped outside, her sneakers quiet on the grass. "What's going on, Timmy?" she asked, her voice soft. Timmy pointed at the fence. "My plane went over there," he said. "And I think Mrs. Grayson's mad." Sarah nodded, like she wasn't surprised at all. "Let's see what's happening," she said, walking toward the fence with Timmy trailing behind her. They couldn't see Linda yet, but they could hear her stomping around in her yard, muttering loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "This is unacceptable. Who did this?" Here's the thing about Linda, she thought she knew everything about everyone in Oakwood Hills. She knew who left their trash cans out too long, who forgot to mow their lawn, who let their kids ride bikes on the sidewalk. She kept a little notebook in her purse, full of names and mistakes. She'd even written about Sarah and Timmy before, something about how their mailbox needed a new coat of paint. Linda thought Sarah was just a regular mom, quiet and boring, someone she could boss around like everyone else. And Timmy? To her, he was just a noisy kid who needed to follow the rules. But Linda was wrong. So wrong. She had no idea who she was really messing with that day. See, Sarah wasn't just a regular mom who washed dishes and drove Timmy to school. She had a secret, a big one. It wasn't something she told people about. Not the neighbors, not her friends, not even Timmy. She kept it hidden, tucked away like a treasure chest buried in the backyard. And that secret? It was about to change everything. Let's rewind a little, just so you can picture it. That sunny Saturday started like any other day. Timmy woke up early, ate a bowl of cereal, Frosted Flakes, his favorite, and ran outside to play. Sarah made coffee, flipped through a magazine, and waved at him through the window. Everything seemed normal. The sun was shining, the sky was blue, and the neighborhood was peaceful. Kids rode their bikes down the street, laughing and shouting. A dog barked somewhere far away. It was the kind of day where nothing bad was supposed to happen. But then Timmy made that paper plane. He didn't mean to start trouble. He just wanted to have fun. He folded the paper carefully, pressing the creases with his fingers. He drew those red stripes because he thought they looked cool, like a real fighter jet. He stood in the backyard, the breeze ruffling his messy hair, and he threw it with all his might. He didn't know where it would land. He didn't know it would fly over the fence. And he definitely didn't know it would make Linda so mad. Back to the moment the plane landed, Linda was in her yard when it happened. She'd been out there all morning, fussing over her roses. She had a little watering can in one hand and a pair of clippers in the other, snipping tiny bits off the bushes to keep them perfect. Her roses were her pride and joy. She'd won awards for them at the county fair, big blue ribbons that she hung on her wall. To Linda, those flowers were more important than anything. So when she saw that paper plane come sailing down from the sky, landing right on her favorite rose bush, she lost it. The plane didn't even break anything. It just sat there, stuck between the thorns, its red stripes peeking out from the green leaves. But to Linda, it was like someone had thrown a rock through her window. She dropped her watering can, and it clattered on the stone path. She marched over to the rose bush, her flip-flops slapping the ground, and snatched the plane up with her long, bony fingers. "Who did this?" she yelled again, waving the plane in the air like it was a weapon. Timmy peeked through a crack in the fence, his nose pressed against the wood. He could see Linda now. Her face was red, her eyes were narrow, and she looked madder than a wet cat. "Mom," he whispered, tugging at Sarah's sleeve. "She's really mad. What do we do?" Sarah crouched down next to him, her eyes twinkling like she knew something he didn't. "Don't worry," she said. "Let's just watch for a minute." Sarah wasn't scared of Linda. Not one bit. Most people in Oakwood Hills got nervous when Linda started yelling. They'd apologize, fix whatever she complained about, and hope she'd leave them alone. But Sarah? She wasn't like that. She stood there by the fence, her arms crossed, listening to Linda's shouts with a little smirk on her face. It was like she was waiting for something big. Linda didn't notice Sarah and Timmy yet. She was too busy stomping around her yard, muttering to herself. "This is vandalism," she said. "A direct attack on my property. I'm calling the police." She pulled her phone out of her pocket, a fancy one with a glittery case, and started dialing. Timmy's stomach flipped. The police, he squeaked. Mom, are we in trouble? Sarah just patted his shoulder. Nope, she said. Not us. That's when you could feel it. The air in Oakwood Hills got a little heavier, like a storm was coming. The neighborhood was still quiet, but something was brewing. Linda thought she was in charge, like always. She thought she could yell and complain and get her way, just like she did with everyone else. She thought Sarah was nobody special, just a mom who'd back down and say sorry. And she thought Timmy's paper plane was the worst thing that could happen to her perfect little world. But here's the kicker, Linda had no clue what was really going on. She didn't know that Sarah's secret was about to come out. She didn't know that this sunny Saturday afternoon wasn't going to end the way she planned. That paper plane? It wasn't just a toy. It was the start of something huge, something that would flip Oakwood Hills upside down and leave Linda wishing she'd never picked up that phone. Sarah knew it, though. She stood there by the fence, watching Linda rant and rave, and she didn't say a word. Her smile stayed small and quiet, but her eyes? They were sharp, like a hawk watching its prey. Timmy didn't understand yet, but he could tell something was different about his mom. She wasn't worried. She wasn't mad. She was ready. And that's where our story begins. A sunny day, a paper plane, a mean neighbor, and a mom with a secret. What was Sarah hiding? Why wasn't she scared of Linda? And what was going to happen when the police showed up? You'll have to keep reading to find out, because this is just the start and it's about to get wild. The second that little paper plane landed on Linda's prize-winning roses, everything changed. It was like a switch flipped in her head. Linda Grayson didn't just walk out of her house, she stormed out, fast and loud, like a tornado wearing flip-flops. Her feet slapped against the ground, flap flap flap, as she charged into her yard. Her face was red, her eyes were narrow, and her voice was so loud it could wake up the whole neighborhood. Who did this? She screeched, her words sharp like a bird squawking. She spotted the paper plane right away. It was stuck in her rose bush, the one with the big, perfect red flowers she loved so much. The plane's wings were crumpled now, caught between the thorny branches, but you could still see the red stripes Timmy had drawn on it. To most people, it was just a piece of paper, a kid's toy that didn't mean much. But to Linda? Oh no. To her, it was like someone had dropped a giant rock on her roses or painted her house purple. She grabbed the plane with her long, skinny fingers, yanking it out of the bush so hard that a few petals fell off. She waved it in the air like it was proof of a terrible crime. This is an outrage, she yelled. Back in his own yard, Timmy froze. His sneakers stuck to the grass like glue. His eyes got big and round, like two full moons, and his mouth dropped open a little. He'd never seen Linda this mad before, and that was saying something, because Linda was mad a lot. He could hear her shouting through the fence, her voice bouncing off the wood. Mom, he whispered, his voice shaking. He didn't know what to do. Was he in trouble? Was Linda going to come over and yell at him? He didn't mean to make her mad, he just wanted his plane to fly. Sarah heard the noise too. She'd been standing by the back door, watching Timmy through the window, when Linda's screeching started. She stepped outside, letting the screen door bang shut behind her. Her sneakers were quiet on the grass as she walked over to Timmy. She didn't look mad or scared, not even a little. Her face was calm, and her brown eyes had a tiny spark in them, like she was about to laugh but didn't want to yet. What's all the fuss about? She asked, her voice soft and steady, like nothing big was happening. Timmy pointed at the fence with a shaky finger. My plane landed in her yard, he said. And she's yelling. Sarah tilted her head, listening to Linda's shouts. They could hear her clear as day now. This is vandalism. Someone's going to pay for this. Linda hollered. Sarah nodded, like she understood, but she didn't rush over to fix it. She just stood there next to Timmy, her hands in her pockets, watching the fence like it was a TV show. That's when Linda saw them. She marched right up to her side of the fence, her flip-flops kicking up dirt. The fence was tall, too tall for Timmy to see over, but there was a little gap between the boards, just big enough to peek through. Linda's sharp eyes spotted Sarah and Timmy standing there. She stopped waving the plane for a second and pointed at them instead. Oh, it's you, she sneered, her voice dripping with meanness. Her lips curled into a nasty smile, like a cat that caught a mouse. I should have known. Your kid's a menace, and you're no better letting him ruin my property. Timmy gulped. He didn't like being called a menace. He wasn't trying to ruin anything. He just liked making planes. He looked up at his mom, waiting for her to say something. Sarah didn't even blink. She stepped a little closer to the fence, her hands still in her pockets, and looked right at Linda through the gap. It's just a paper plane, Linda, she said, her voice as calm as a sunny day. No harm done. It didn't break anything. She sounded so nice, like she was trying to help Linda calm down. But Linda? She wasn't calming down. Not even close. Her face got redder, and her eyes got narrower, like tiny slits. No harm done, she snapped, holding the crumpled plane up like it was a dead bug. This is my yard. My roses. You can't just let your wild kid throw junk over here and act like it's fine. She shook the plane in the air, and her voice got louder with every word. This is disrespect. This is a disaster. Sarah didn't argue back. She just stood there, letting Linda yell. Timmy tugged at her sleeve, his voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. Mom, are we in trouble? He asked. He didn't like how Linda was talking about him. It made his tummy feel all twisty, like when he ate too much candy. He didn't want the police to come. He didn't want to get yelled at more. But Sarah? She didn't look worried at all. She turned to Timmy and gave him a small, mysterious smile, the kind that made you wonder what she was thinking. Not even a little, she said, patting his head. We're okay. Linda didn't hear that part. She was too busy being mad. She threw the paper plane down on the ground and stomped on it with her flip-flop, smashing it flat. That's what I think of your stupid plane, she shouted. Then she pulled her phone out of her pocket, a shiny one with a glittery pink case, and started pressing buttons fast. I'm calling 911, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is vandalism. This is a threat to my safety. The police need to know about this. Timmy's eyes got even bigger. The police, he squeaked, grabbing Sarah's hand. Mom, she's calling the cops. His heart was thumping fast now, like a drum in his chest. He didn't mean to start all this trouble. It was just a plane. Just a toy. He looked at Sarah, waiting for her to get mad or scared or something. But Sarah? She didn't move. She didn't yell. She just watched Linda with that same little smile, like she knew something Linda didn't. Linda held the phone to her ear, pacing back and forth in her yard. Her flip-flop slapped the ground, and her voice was loud and fast. Yes, hello, 911, she said when someone answered. This is Linda Grayson from Oakwood Hills. I need help right now. There's a kid next door throwing things into my yard, vandalism. It's dangerous. I don't feel safe. She kept going, waving her free hand around like she was in a big play. His mom doesn't even care. She's letting him run wild. You need to send someone quick. Timmy squeezed Sarah's hand tighter. What's gonna happen? He whispered. He didn't want police cars showing up with flashing lights. He didn't want Linda to keep yelling. He just wanted to go back to playing in the yard. But Sarah squeezed his hand back, gentle and strong. Don't worry, she said, her voice still soft. She's making a big fuss over nothing. We're fine. Linda hung up the phone and crossed her arms, glaring at them through the fence. You'll see, she said, her voice sharp like a knife. The police are coming, and they're going to deal with you. You can't just mess with me and get away with it. She sounded so sure of herself, like she'd already won. Linda always thought she had the upper hand. She'd been bossing people around in Oakwood Hills for years, and most of the time, it worked. See, Linda wasn't just mean, she was good at being mean. She'd bullied half the neighborhood into doing what she wanted. If someone parked their car in the wrong spot, Linda would knock on their door and yell until they moved it. If a kid left a toy on the sidewalk, Linda would pick it up, throw it away, and tell their parents they were raising troublemakers. She had a little notebook where she wrote down everything, every mistake, every rule someone broke. She'd show up at people's houses with that notebook, pointing at her scribbles and saying, "See? You're breaking the rules." The other grown-ups didn't like her, but they were scared of her. Linda could make your life hard if you didn't listen. She'd call the HOA and get you a fine. She'd complain until you gave up and did what she said. One time, she made Mr. Carter repaint his whole fence because she didn't like the color. Another time, she told Mrs. Lopez her dog barked too much, and Mrs. Lopez had to send the dog to live with her sister. Linda always got her way, and she loved it. So when she saw Timmy's paper plane in her yard, she didn't just get mad, she got ready to fight. To her, this wasn't just a kid's toy. It was a challenge. Someone had dared to mess with her perfect little world, and she wasn't going to let it slide. She thought Sarah would back down, like everyone else did. She thought Timmy would cry and say sorry. She thought the police would show up, take her side, and make everything go her way, just like always. But here's the thing, Linda didn't know what was really happening. She didn't know that trouble was already brewing, and it wasn't because of that paper plane. She didn't see the way Sarah's eyes sparkled, like she was holding a secret bigger than Oakwood Hills itself. Linda thought she was the queen of the neighborhood, the one who made the rules and won every fight. But this time, she was wrong. Let's picture it for a second. Linda stood there in her yard, her flip-flops dusty, her phone still in her hand. Her roses were behind her, bright and perfect except for the few petals the plane had knocked loose. The sun was high in the sky, making everything warm and bright, but the air felt heavy now, like something big was coming. Neighbors started peeking out their windows, their curtains twitching as they watched. They'd heard Linda yelling before, but this was louder, wilder. They wanted to see what would happen next. Timmy stayed close to Sarah, his hand still in hers. He didn't like how Linda kept glaring at them. It made him feel small, like he'd done something really bad. "Why's she so mad?" he asked, his voice quiet. Sarah bent down a little so she could look him in the eye. "Some people get mad over little things," she said. "But that doesn't mean we did anything wrong." "Okay." Timmy nodded, but he still felt nervous. Linda's voice was like a hammer banging in his head. Linda kept pacing, muttering to herself. "The police will be here soon," she said, loud enough for Sarah and Timmy to hear. "They'll see this mess and know I'm right. You can't treat me like this." She kicked the smashed paper plane with her foot, sending it skidding across the grass. She looked so proud, like she'd already won the biggest prize. She didn't care that it was just a toy. To her, it was a war and she was the general. Sarah straightened up and crossed her arms. She didn't say anything back to Linda. She didn't need to. Her face said it all, calm, steady, and just a little bit sneaky. Timmy looked at her, confused. Why wasn't she yelling? Why wasn't she scared? Most moms would be upset if someone called the police on their kid, right? But Sarah wasn't like most moms. She stood there, cool as a breeze, like she was waiting for something to happen. And that's when you could feel it, the tension. It was like the air got thick, like before a big rain. Linda was on one side of the fence, puffed up and angry, ready to win. Sarah and Timmy were on the other side, quiet and still, but not afraid. The neighborhood watched, holding its breath. Linda thought she had everything under control. She thought she was the boss, like always. She thought that paper plane was the worst thing she'd have to deal with that day. But she was wrong. Trouble was coming, real trouble. And it wasn't because of Timmy or his plane. It was because of Sarah. Linda didn't know it yet, but she just picked a fight with someone she couldn't beat. That little smile on Sarah's face? That wasn't just a mom being nice. It was a hint, a clue that something big was hiding, something Linda never saw coming. What was Sarah's secret? Why wasn't she worried? And what was going to happen when the police got there? The answers were close, so close you could almost touch them. But not yet. The storm was still building, and Linda was about to find out she wasn't the queen she thought she was. The next few minutes in Oakwood Hills were wild, like a storm blowing through a quiet day. Everything felt messy and loud, and it all started with Linda. She was still in her yard, pacing back and forth like a tiger in a cage. Her flip-flops slapped the ground hard, flap flap flap, kicking up little puffs of dirt. She held her glittery pink phone tied to her ear, talking to the 911 dispatcher. Her voice was shrill and sharp, cutting through the air like a whistle. "Yes, this family needs to be taught a lesson," she shouted. "They're out of control. Throwing things into my yard, vandalism. I'm not safe here." Linda didn't stop moving. She walked one way, then turned and walked back, her free hand waving around like she was swatting flies. Her face was red, almost as red as her prize roses, and her eyes were narrow and angry. She kept pointing at the smashed paper plane on the ground, even though the dispatcher couldn't see it. "It's a disaster," she yelled into the phone. "You need to send someone right now. This can't wait." She sounded like she was the most important person in the world, and everyone else had to listen. Over in their yard, Timmy and Sarah heard every word. Timmy had moved to the porch now. He sat on the steps, his knees pulled up to his chest, his messy hair flopping over his eyes. He looked worried, really worried. His tummy felt all twisty, like it did when he got in trouble at school. He didn't mean to make Linda so mad. It was just a paper plane. Just a toy he made for fun. But now Linda was yelling about police and lessons, and Timmy didn't know what was going to happen. He hugged his knees tighter and peeked at his mom, hoping she'd fix everything. Sarah wasn't sitting. She was standing by the fence, leaning against it with her arms crossed over her chest. She looked calm, way too calm for all the noise Linda was making. Her blue t-shirt fluttered a little in the breeze, and her brown hair stayed neat and still. She watched Linda like a hawk watches a mouse, quiet, sharp, and ready. Every time Linda shouted something mean, Sarah's eyes got a tiny bit brighter, like she was figuring something out. But she didn't say anything. She just stood there, listening, with that small, mysterious smile on her face. The neighborhood wasn't quiet anymore. Linda's yelling was so loud that it pulled people out of their houses, well, sort of. Neighbors didn't come outside, but they peeked through their windows. Curtains twitched all up and down the street. Mr. Carter, who lived 2 houses over, pushed his glasses up his nose and stared through his kitchen window. Mrs. Lopez, across the street, pulled her curtain back just enough to see. Even little Jenny from next door pressed her face against the glass, her nose smushed flat. They all wanted to know what was going on. Linda was always loud, but this was different. This was a big show, and nobody wanted to miss it. Linda kept going, her voice getting higher and higher. "I've lived here for years," she told the dispatcher. "I keep this place perfect, and now this kid, this little troublemaker, is ruining it. His mom doesn't even care. She's just standing there like it's nothing." She pointed at Sarah through the fence, her long finger shaking. "You need to hurry. I want them gone." She sounded so sure the police would take her side. After all, they always did. Linda called the cops all the time about loud dogs, messy yards, kids on bikes. She thought this was just another win for her. Timmy hugged his knees harder. "Mom," he whispered, his voice small and scared. "She's saying bad stuff about us. Is she right?" He didn't want to be a troublemaker. He didn't want his mom to get in trouble either. He just wanted to go back inside and forget this ever happened. Sarah turned her head a little and looked at him. Her smile didn't go away, it got softer, like a hug. "She's wrong, Timmy," she said, her voice gentle. "You didn't do anything bad. She's just mad because she likes being mad." Timmy nodded, but he still felt nervous. Linda's yelling made it hard to believe everything was okay. Sarah turned back to the fence, her arms still crossed. She didn't move, didn't shout, didn't even look upset. She just watched Linda pace and yell, like it was all part of a game. Every time Linda said something mean like troublemaker or ruining my yard, Sarah's eyes got a little sharper. It was like she was counting every word, saving them up for something. But what? Timmy didn't know, and neither did Linda. That was the trick. Sarah had a secret, and it was starting to peek out, little by little. Then, something weird happened. A police car rolled up the street. It didn't come fast with sirens blaring and lights flashing, like you see in movies. Nope. It was quiet, super quiet. The car just slid along the road, its tires barely making a sound, and parked across the street from Timmy's house. It was a regular police car, white with black stripes and a little gold badge on the side. The engine turned off, and for a second, everything felt still, like the world was holding its breath. 2 officers stepped out. One was tall, with short black hair and a calm face. The other was shorter, with a cap pulled low over his eyes. They didn't look mad or in a hurry. They closed the car doors, click, click, and stood there for a moment, looking around. Linda didn't see them at first. She was too busy waving her arms and shouting into her phone. "Yes, it's an emergency," she said. "They're still here, acting like nothing's wrong. Hurry up." She spun around, pointing at the smashed paper plane again, her flip-flops kicking it by accident. Timmy saw the police first. His eyes got big, and he pointed. "Mom, look," he whispered, his voice all shaking. He didn't know why they were here, but police cars always made him feel funny, like something big was happening. Sarah glanced over her shoulder at the car, then back at Linda. Her smile grew just a tiny bit wider, like she'd been waiting for this. She didn't say anything yet, just kept leaning against the fence, cool as ever. The officers didn't rush over to Linda, even though she was the loudest thing around. Nope. They looked at Sarah first. The tall one tipped his head a little, like a tiny nod, and the short one gave a quick wave. It was small, so small you might miss it if you blinked, but it happened. They knew her. Timmy saw it, and his mouth dropped open. "Mom, did they just wave at you?" he asked, his voice louder now. Sarah patted his head, her hand warm and steady. "You'll see, buddy," she said, her voice soft but sure. Linda finally noticed the police. She spun around so fast her flip-flops almost flew off. "Oh, good, you're here," she shouted, hanging up her phone and stuffing it in her pocket. She marched toward the edge of her yard, waving her arms like she was directing traffic. "Over here. It's them." She pointed at Sarah and Timmy, her finger jabbing the air. "Arrest them. They attacked my home with this thing." She kicked the paper plane again, sending it tumbling across the grass. "I called you. Do something." The officers didn't move. They stood by their car, hands on their belts, looking at Linda like she was a noisy bird they didn't want to chase. The tall one, the one with the calm voice, stepped forward a little. "Ma'am," he said, slow and steady, "we'll get to that. But we're here on another call." His words were simple, but they hit Linda like a splash of cold water. She stopped waving her arms and blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "What call?" she said, her voice high and confused. "I'm the one who dialed 911. This is my emergency." The tall officer didn't answer right away. He glanced at Sarah again, just for a second, and then back at Linda. The short officer stayed quiet, his cap hiding his eyes, but he rocked back on his heels like he was waiting for something fun to happen. Linda's face got all scrunched up. "What do you mean, another call?" she demanded, crossing her arms. "I told you what happened. That kid threw this plane into my yard. It's vandalism. It's dangerous. Arrest them right now." Timmy scooted closer to Sarah on the porch steps. "Mom, why aren't they listening to her?" he whispered. He didn't get it. Linda was so loud, so sure, shouldn't the police do what she said? That's how it worked on TV, right? But Sarah just chuckled a tiny, quiet laugh and ruffled his hair. "They've got other things to worry about," she said. "Just watch." Linda didn't like being ignored. She stomped her foot, her flip-flop making a loud smack on the ground. "Hello? Did you hear me?" she yelled at the officers. "I'm the victim here. That family's been a problem forever. They don't follow rules. They don't care about my roses." She kept going, her voice getting faster and louder, like a train speeding up. "I've lived here longer than them. I keep this place perfect. You need to take them away." The neighbors watched harder now. Curtains opened a little wider, and a few faces pressed closer to the windows. Mr. Carter's glasses glinted in the sunlight as he leaned out his door a bit. Mrs. Lopez whispered something to her husband, who nodded and peeked out too. Even little Jenny giggled, her hands on the glass. They could tell something was off. Linda was yelling like always, but the police weren't jumping to help her. Why not? What was going on? Sarah stayed still, leaning on the fence. She didn't say a word to Linda or the officers. She just watched, her arms crossed, her smile growing a tiny bit more. Every time Linda shouted something mean like problem family or no rules, Sarah's eyes got sharper, like she was writing it all down in her head. Timmy looked up at her, his worry starting to mix with wonder. "Mom, why are you smiling?" he asked. "She's so mad." Sarah winked at him, actually winked, and said, "Sometimes mad people don't see what's coming." The tall officer raised a hand, like he was telling Linda to slow down. "Ma'am, we heard you," he said, his voice still calm. "But we've got another call to handle first. We'll talk to everyone, okay?" Linda's jaw dropped. Another call, she sputtered. What's more important than this? I'm the one who needs help. She pointed at the paper plane again, like it was the worst thing in the world. Look at this mess. Look at my roses. The officers didn't look at the plane. They didn't look at the roses either. The tall one glanced at Sarah one more time, and the short one shifted his weight, like he was ready to move but not yet. Linda didn't notice. She was too busy being mad, too busy thinking she was in charge. She didn't see the little nod the officers gave Sarah. She didn't see how Sarah's smile stayed steady, like she knew something big was about to happen. Timmy tugged at Sarah's sleeve again. Mom, what's going on? He asked, his voice a mix of scared and curious. He didn't understand why the police weren't listening to Linda. He didn't get why they waved at his mom. And he really didn't know why Sarah looked so calm when everything was so loud and crazy. Sarah bent down a little, her eyes twinkling like stars. You'll see, buddy, she said. It's gonna be okay. Better than okay. The air felt different now, heavy and buzzy, like before a thunderstorm. Linda was still pacing, still yelling, still waving her arms. This is ridiculous, she shouted. I called you. I'm the victim. Do your job. The officers didn't budge. They stood by their car, watching her, but their eyes kept flicking to Sarah. The neighbors leaned closer to their windows, whispering to each other. Timmy sat on the porch, his heart thumping fast, waiting for whatever came next. Something was happening, something odd and exciting. Linda thought she had everything under control, like she always did. She thought the police were there for her, ready to arrest Timmy and Sarah and make her the winner. But she was wrong. The officers weren't here just because of her call. They were here for something else, something bigger. And Sarah? She knew it. That's why she wasn't scared. That's why she smiled. What was it? What did Sarah know? Why did the police nod at her? The answers were coming, slow and sneaky, like little crumbs leading to a big surprise. Linda didn't see it yet, but she was about to. The chaos was building, the tension was growing, and the neighborhood was watching. This sunny Saturday was turning into something wild, and it wasn't over yet. The police officers didn't stop to talk to Linda. They didn't even look at her much. Instead, they walked right past her, their boots crunching on the grass, heading straight toward Sarah. Linda's jaw dropped so low it almost hit the ground. Her eyes got big, and her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She couldn't believe it. The neighbors watching from their windows gasped, and their curtains twitched harder than ever. Something big was happening, something nobody saw coming. The tall officer, the one with the calm voice, stopped in front of Sarah. He tipped his hat a little, like a cowboy in a movie, and smiled. Mrs. Jackson, he said, his voice friendly but strong. We got your report. Looks like we're right on time. The shorter officer stood next to him, nodding under his cap, his hands on his belt. Timmy, still sitting on the porch steps, looked up with wide eyes. Mom, he whispered, his voice all shaky. He didn't know what was going on, but it felt important. Linda heard the officer's words, and her face twisted up like she'd eaten a sour lemon. Her report, she sputtered, her voice loud and confused. What report? She's the criminal here. She pointed at Sarah with a shaky finger, her flip-flop sliding a little as she stomped forward. She's the one who let her kid throw that plane into my yard. She's the problem, not me. Linda's cheeks were red again, and her hands waved around like crazy. She thought the police were there for her, to help her, to arrest Sarah and Timmy. She was so sure she was right. But Sarah didn't look scared. Not one bit. She stepped forward, away from the fence, and her quiet mom vibe started to fade fast. She didn't look like just a regular mom anymore, the kind who makes cookies and washes dishes. Nope. She stood taller now, her shoulders back, her eyes sharp and bright. The breeze blew her blue t-shirt, and her sneakers planted firm on the grass. She reached into her pocket slow and steady and pulled something out. It was small, shiny, and metal, glinting in the sunlight. She held it up high so everyone could see. It was a badge. A real police badge, the kind you see on TV shows. It had a star on it, and some tiny words carved into the metal. Sarah's voice rang out, clear and strong, louder than Linda's yelling. Officer Sarah Jackson, she said, looking right at Linda. Undercover division. I've been watching this neighborhood for months. And Linda? You're the reason we're here. She didn't shout, but her words hit hard, like a big bell ringing across the street. The crowd gasped loud. Timmy's mouth fell open, and he jumped up from the porch steps. "Mom, you're a cop," he squeaked, his voice high and shocked. The neighbors gasped again, their faces pressed against their windows. Mr. Carter dropped his glasses, and they clattered on his porch. Mrs. Lopez clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes huge. Little Jenny next door clapped her hands and giggled, like it was the best surprise ever. Everyone was stunned. Sarah a cop? A secret cop? Nobody saw that coming. Linda's face went white as a sheet of paper. Her arms dropped to her sides, and her flip-flops stopped moving. She looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under her. "What?" she whispered, her voice tiny now, not loud anymore. "Undercover? You?" She blinked fast, like her eyes didn't believe what they saw. The badge in Sarah's hand shone bright, and Linda stared at it, her mouth flapping but no words coming out. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to do. Sarah turned to the officers, calm and sure, like she'd done this 100 times. "She's been harassing residents," she said, pointing at Linda. "Filing fake complaints. Even tampering with mailboxes to dig up dirt on people. I've got it all on record." Her voice was steady, like a teacher explaining a lesson. She pulled her phone out of her other pocket, a regular black one, nothing fancy, and tapped the screen with her thumb. A video started playing, loud enough for everyone to hear. The video showed Linda. There she was, sneaking around the neighborhood at night with a flashlight. She peeked into mailboxes, pulling out letters and reading them, then stuffing them back all messy. Another clip showed her yelling at Mr. Carter, waving her little notebook and pointing at his fence. "This color's against the rules," she shouted on the video, her voice sharp and mean. Then it cut to her kicking over a kid's bike, little Jenny's bike, because it was left on the sidewalk. She laughed after she did it, like it was a game. The video kept going, showing more and more Linda being sneaky, Linda being mean, Linda breaking rules she said everyone else had to follow. The evidence was clear. You couldn't argue with it? The neighbors gasped again, louder this time. "She did that?" Mrs. Lopez whispered to her husband, her voice shaking. "I knew she was bossy, but this..." Mr. Carter shook his head, picking up his glasses. Little Jenny stopped giggling and frowned. "That's my bike," she said, pointing at the window. Even Timmy stared, his eyes big. "Mom, she's been doing bad stuff?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "Yep," she said. "And I've been watching her do it." Linda's face wasn't white anymore, it was turning green, like she might be sick. "That's not true," she yelled, but her voice sounded weak now, not strong. "That's fake. You made that up." She pointed at Sarah's phone, her hand shaking so much it looked like it might fall off. "You can't prove anything. I'm the victim here. That plane ruined my roses." She tried to sound mad again, but it didn't work. Nobody believed her now. The video was too real, too loud, too clear. The tall officer stepped closer to Linda, his face serious but not mean. "Ma'am," he said, "we've been working with Officer Jackson for a while. She's been undercover here, keeping an eye on things. And you've been on our list." The shorter officer nodded, pulling a little notebook from his pocket, not like Linda's, but an official one. He flipped it open and started reading. Harassment complaints from 6 neighbors. Fake reports to the HOA. Mail tampering 3 times we know about. And now a false 911 call. He looked up at Linda. "That's a lot of trouble." Linda's eyes darted around, like she was looking for a way out. "False call," she squeaked. "I didn't lie. That plane was real. Look at it." She pointed at the crumpled paper plane on the ground, its red stripes all smudged now. But the officers didn't look. The tall one shook his head. "A paper plane's not an emergency," he said. "Calling 911 over it? That's a problem. And everything else Officer Jackson caught you doing? That's bigger problems." Sarah put her phone back in her pocket and held up her badge again. "I moved here with Timmy months ago," she said, her voice loud so everyone could hear. "The police sent me to watch this neighborhood. People were complaining about someone being mean, breaking rules, scaring everyone. I didn't know it was Linda at first. But then I saw her yelling at people, sneaking around, making up stories. I wrote it all down. I took videos. I told the police everything. She looked at Linda, her eyes steady. You thought I was just a quiet mom. But I was watching you the whole time. Timmy jumped up and ran to Sarah, his sneakers bouncing on the grass. Mom, you're a secret cop, he said again, his voice full of wonder. He grabbed her hand and stared at the badge, his mouth open wide. That's so cool. Why didn't you tell me? Sarah laughed a real laugh, not just a chuckle, and ruffled his messy hair. It's a secret job, buddy, she said. I couldn't tell anyone, not even you. But now you know. The neighbors started talking all at once, their voices buzzing through the windows. She's a cop. Mr. Carter said, his voice loud enough to hear. I thought she was just new. Mrs. Lopez nodded fast. She's been here all this time, watching Linda? Wow. Little Jenny clapped again. She's like a superhero, she shouted, her face bright. The whole street was alive now, everyone whispering and pointing and smiling. They couldn't believe it. Sarah quiet, nice Sarah was a police officer, and she'd caught Linda red-handed. Linda took a step back, her flip-flops slipping on the grass. This is crazy, she yelled, but it sounded like a whine now. You can't do this to me. I'm the HOA queen. I make the rules here. She waved her arms again, but it didn't look strong anymore, it looked silly. The tall officer raised a hand to stop her. Not anymore, he said. We've got enough to take you in. Harassment, tampering, lying to the police, that's serious stuff. Sarah turned to Timmy and smiled big. See, she said. That plane didn't start trouble. It just helped me finish my job. Timmy grinned, his worry all gone now. You're the best mom ever, he said, hugging her tight. Sarah hugged him back, her badge still in her hand, shining in the sun. The neighbors cheered, quiet at first, then louder, clapping from their porches and windows. They were happy. Linda wasn't the boss anymore. Linda's shoulders slumped. She looked small now, not tall and scary like before. You can't arrest me, she said, but her voice was weak. I didn't do anything wrong. The short officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs, the metal clinking softly. We're not arresting you yet, he said. But you're coming with us to talk. We've got questions, and you've got answers. He stepped toward her, and Linda backed up, her eyes wild. The video on Sarah's phone had stopped, but everyone remembered it. Linda sneaking, Linda yelling, Linda kicking that bike, it was all there, clear as day. She couldn't talk her way out of it. She couldn't yell her way out either. The police knew everything, thanks to Sarah. The tall officer tipped his hat to her again. Good work, Officer Jackson, he said. You got her. Sarah nodded, her smile strong and proud. Thanks, she said. It's been a long few months. She looked at Linda one last time. You thought you could scare everyone, she said. But you picked the wrong neighborhood and the wrong mom. Her words were simple, but they hit hard. Linda didn't say anything back. She just stared at the ground, her flip-flops dirty, her hands shaking. The neighbors kept cheering. Way to go, Sarah. Mr. Carter called, clapping his hands. You showed her. Mrs. Lopez shouted, waving from her porch. Little Jenny ran outside, jumping up and down. You're my hero, she yelled, her pigtails bouncing. Timmy laughed, still holding Sarah's hand. Mom, they love you, he said. Sarah grinned. Guess they do, she said, giving his hand a squeeze. Linda's big moment was over. She wasn't the queen anymore, she was just a lady in flip-flops who got caught. The police officers stood close to her now, ready to take her away. Sarah's badge shone bright, and her secret was out. She wasn't just a mom, she was a hero, a secret cop who saved the day. And that paper plane? It wasn't trouble, it was the key that unlocked everything. The sun was still high, the sky still blue, but Oakwood Hills felt different now. The air was lighter, the noise was happier. Linda's yelling was done, and Sarah's quiet strength had won. The big reveal was here, and it was awesome. But it wasn't the end, not yet. There was more to come, and everyone couldn't wait to see it. Linda didn't give up easy. She stood there in her yard, her flip-flops dirty, her face all green and shaky, trying to talk her way out of trouble. "You can't do this," she yelled at the police officers, her voice high and squeaky. "I didn't do anything wrong. That plane was real. It's not my fault." She waved her arms like a bird flapping its wings, pointing at the smashed paper plane on the grass. She even picked it up again, holding it tight like it was her last chance to win. But the officers weren't listening to her excuses. The tall one, the one with the calm voice, shook his head. "Ma'am, you're coming with us," he said, slow and steady. He reached down to his belt and pulled out a pair of shiny handcuffs. They clinked together, metal on metal, and the sunlight bounced off them. "False 911 calls and harassment. That's enough for a trip downtown." His words were simple, but they hit hard. Linda's eyes got big, and her mouth opened wide, like she couldn't believe what she heard. The shorter officer stepped closer, his cap still low over his eyes. He didn't say much, but he nodded, like he agreed with everything the tall one said. Linda shrieked a loud, wild sound that made Timmy jump a little. "No. You can't take me," she cried, clutching the paper plane so hard it crumpled even more. "I'm the victim here. I'm the good one." But the officers didn't stop. The tall one took her arm, gentle but firm, and started walking her toward the police car parked across the street. Linda didn't go quietly. She twisted and pulled, her flip-flops slipping on the grass. "Let me go," she shouted. "This is a mistake. I'll call the HOA. I'll call my lawyer." Her voice got louder and louder, bouncing off the houses. But the officers kept moving, steady as rocks. The tall one held her arm, and the shorter one walked behind, making sure she didn't run off. They led her right to the car, its white paint shining in the sun, and opened the back door. The neighbors watched it all. At first, they were quiet, just peeking from their windows and porches. But then, as Linda got closer to the car, they started to cheer. It was soft at first, a few claps from Mr. Carter, a little woo from Mrs. Lopez. Then it got louder. More hands clapped, more voices shouted. "Yeah," little Jenny yelled, jumping up and down on her porch. "She's gone." The sound grew and grew, like a wave rolling through Oakwood Hills. They were happy, really happy. Linda didn't like that. She turned her head, glaring at everyone as the tall officer helped her into the back seat. "Stop cheering," she snapped. "You're all against me." But nobody stopped. The cheers got even louder, and a few people laughed. The paper plane fell out of her hand as she sat down, landing on the ground by the car. She tried to grab it, but the door shut bang and it was too late. The tall officer picked up the plane and tossed it into a little bag, like it was evidence now. The police car started up, its engine rumbling soft and low. The shorter officer got in the front, and the tall one waved at Sarah one last time before sliding into the driver's seat. The car rolled forward, slow and smooth, pulling away from the curb. Linda's face pressed against the window, her eyes wide and mad, her mouth moving like she was still yelling. But the windows were up, and nobody could hear her anymore. The car turned the corner and disappeared, and just like that, Linda was gone. The cheering kept going for a minute, loud and bright. Neighbors stepped out of their houses now, not just peeking anymore. Mr. Carter came down his steps, clapping his big hands. Mrs. Lopez and her husband walked across the street, smiling big. Little Jenny ran over to Timmy's yard, her pigtails bouncing. "She's gone. She's really gone," Jenny said, spinning in a circle. The air felt lighter, like a big cloud had lifted off Oakwood Hills. Sarah turned away from the fence and looked at Timmy. He was still on the porch, standing now, staring at her with huge eyes. He couldn't believe what he'd just seen. His mom a secret cop? The police taking Linda away? It was like a movie, but it was real. "You're a cop," he squeaked, his voice high and excited. He ran down the steps, his sneakers thumping, and stopped right in front of her. "A real cop?" Sarah laughed, a happy, warm laugh that made Timmy grin. "Yep," she said, bending down so she could look him in the eye. "I'm a police officer. Undercover, so it's a secret job. And I wasn't about to let her ruin your fun." She ruffled his messy hair, and Timmy's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "That's so cool," he said, bouncing on his toes. You caught her. You're like a superhero. Sarah stood up, still smiling, and put her badge back in her pocket. Not a superhero, she said. Just a mom who wants things to be fair. Timmy hugged her tight, wrapping his arms around her waist. You're the best mom ever, he said, his voice muffled against her shirt. Sarah hugged him back, her arms strong and warm. Thanks, buddy, she said. You're the best kid. That's when the neighbors started coming over. They didn't stay on their porches anymore, they walked right into Timmy's yard, their faces full of surprise and smiles. Mr. Carter got there first, his glasses slipping down his nose. Sarah, we had no idea, he said, shaking his head. You're a cop? All this time? He looked at her like she'd just flown down from the sky. Sarah shrugged, her hands in her pockets. That's the point of undercover, she said. Nobody's supposed to know. Mrs. Lopez came next, her husband right behind her. We're so sorry, she said, her voice soft. We didn't step in sooner. Linda was always yelling, but we didn't know she was that bad. Her husband nodded. She scared us, he said. We just tried to stay out of her way. Sarah smiled at them, kind and easy. It's okay, she said. I get it. She was tough. But now, everyone's safe to fly their planes or ride their bikes, or whatever. Little Jenny ran up, tugging at Sarah's sleeve. You're my hero, she said, her eyes big and bright. She kicked my bike, and you stopped her. Jenny hugged Sarah's legs, and Sarah laughed again. Glad I could help, she said, patting Jenny's head. More neighbors came over, moms, dads, even a few kids. They all crowded around, talking fast and loud, asking questions. How long were you a cop? Did you know about Linda the whole time? Are you staying here now? Sarah answered as best she could, her voice calm and friendly. I've been a cop for years, she said. Moved here with Timmy a few months ago to watch the neighborhood. Linda was the big problem, but I had to be sure. Now it's done. She looked around at all the smiling faces, and her eyes twinkled. And yeah, we're staying. This is home. The neighbors cheered again, not as loud as when Linda left, but happy and warm. You're amazing, Mr. Carter said, clapping her on the shoulder. We're lucky to have you. Mrs. Lopez nodded fast. No more Linda. No more rules about everything. Little Jenny jumped up and down. Can I fly a plane too? She asked. Timmy grinned at her. Yeah, he said. I'll show you how. Sarah stepped back a little, letting the neighbors talk and laugh. She looked at Timmy, who was still bouncing with excitement. You okay? She asked, her voice soft. Timmy nodded fast. Yeah, Mom. This is the best day ever. You're a cop, and Linda's gone, and everyone's happy. He hugged her again, and Sarah hugged him back, her smile big and real. The sun was starting to dip now, turning the sky orange and pink. The air felt cool and fresh, like a new start. The police car was long gone, and Linda's yard sat quiet, no yelling, no stomping, just her perfect roses sitting there alone. The neighbors didn't go back inside right away. They stayed in Timmy's yard, talking and smiling, some sitting on the grass, some leaning against the fence. It was like a party, but a quiet one, a happy one. Mr. Carter walked over to Sarah again, his hands in his pockets. You know, he said, Linda made my life hard. Painted my fence because she didn't like the color. Yelled at me all the time. I never said anything back. He shook his head. Wish I had. Sarah smiled at him. You don't have to worry about that now, she said. She's not in charge anymore. Mrs. Lopez brought over a plate of cookies. She'd run inside to grab them. For you, she said, handing them to Sarah. Thank you. The cookies were chocolate chip, warm and gooey, and Timmy grabbed one right away. Thanks, he said, his mouth full. Sarah took one too, biting into it with a grin. These are great, she said. You didn't have to. Mrs. Lopez waved her hand. Yes, I did, she said. You saved us. Little Jenny ran off with Timmy to the backyard, giggling and chasing each other. Let's make more planes. Timmy shouted, and Jenny clapped. Yeah. Big ones. They grabbed some paper from inside, bright colors this time, red and blue, and started folding, their hands quick and messy. The other kids joined in, and soon the yard was full of laughter and paper planes flying everywhere. Sarah watched them, leaning against the porch railing. The neighbors kept talking, their voices soft and happy. She was awful, one mom said, shaking her head. Always measuring my grass. Another dad nodded. She fined me for my dog barking once. They laughed now, not scared anymore. Linda's rules didn't matter. Sarah had made everything right. The sky got darker, stars popping out one by one. The planes kept flying, little dots of color looping over the fence, landing in the grass, sailing high. Timmy ran up to Sarah, holding a red plane with wobbly wings. "Look, Mom," he said. "This one's for you." He threw it, and it soared up, then floated down soft and slow. Sarah caught it, smiling big. "Perfect," she said. "You're getting good at this." The neighbors started heading home, waving as they went. "See you tomorrow, Sarah," Mr. Carter called. "Thanks again," Mrs. Lopez shouted. Little Jenny hugged Sarah one more time before running off with her mom. The yard got quiet, just Sarah and Timmy left, the grass covered in paper planes. They sat on the porch steps together, the air cool and still. "You did good today," Sarah said, looking at Timmy. "That plane started it all." Timmy grinned, his teeth showing. "I didn't know it would be so big," he said. "But you were awesome, Mom." "A secret cop? That's the coolest thing ever." Sarah laughed, pulling him close. "You're pretty cool too," she said. "We're a team." They sat there a while, watching the stars. Linda was gone, the neighborhood was free, and justice was served. No more yelling, no more fake rules, just peace and fun. Sarah's secret was out, and it made everything better. The paper plane that started it all? It was still there, crumpled but important, a little hero of its own. Oakwood Hills was safe again, and Sarah and Timmy. They were right where they belonged. The sun was dipping low in the sky now, painting everything in Oakwood Hills with a warm, golden glow. It wasn't bright and hot anymore, it was soft and quiet, like the day was winding down to rest. The big oak tree in Timmy's backyard cast a long shadow across the grass, and the air felt cool against your skin. The neighborhood was calm again, no more yelling, no more police cars, just peace. It was the kind of moment where you could sit and breathe and feel happy about everything. Timmy wasn't ready to sit still, though. He ran to the backyard, his sneakers kicking up little bits of dirt. He had a new piece of paper in his hands, bright blue this time, with yellow stripes he'd drawn with a crayon. He folded it fast, his fingers quick and sure, making a new paper plane. He grinned big, his messy hair flopping in his eyes, and held it up to show Sarah. "Look, Mom," he said, his voice full of excitement. "This one's gonna fly super high." Sarah stood on the porch, leaning against the railing, watching him with a smile. Her badge was tucked away in her pocket now, hidden again, and she looked like just a mom, blue t-shirt, jeans, and that warm, kind face. But she wasn't just a mom, not after today. She was a hero, a secret cop who'd saved the day. For now, though, she was happy to watch Timmy play, her arms crossed, her eyes bright with pride. Timmy stepped back, took a big breath, and threw the plane with all his might. It shot up into the air, fast and strong, the blue paper catching the golden sunlight. It didn't wobble or fall like some of his other planes. Nope, this one soared, higher than ever, looping over the big oak tree and sailing way past the fence. It didn't land in Linda's yard this time, it kept going, floating over the street, high above the houses. Timmy jumped up and down, clapping his hands. "Yes," he shouted. "It's the best one yet." Sarah laughed, a soft, happy sound, and clapped too. "Nice job, buddy," she called, her voice carrying across the yard. She watched the plane until it disappeared, a tiny blue dot against the orange sky. Timmy ran back to her, his face all red and sweaty, but he couldn't stop smiling. "Did you see that, Mom?" he asked, bouncing on his toes. "It went so far." Sarah nodded, ruffling his hair. "I saw," she said. "You're a pro now." They sat down on the porch steps together, the wood creaking a little under them. The grass was littered with other paper planes, red ones, white ones, some crumpled, some still need. The day had been wild, full of yelling and surprises, but now it was quiet. The neighbors had gone back inside, their lights flickering on as the sky got darker. The police car was long gone, and Linda's house sat still, no flip-flops stomping around anymore. It was just Timmy and Sarah, the two of them, looking out at the world they'd changed. Sarah leaned back, her hands resting on the step behind her. She looked at Timmy, then up at the sky, where the first stars were starting to peek out. "You know," she said, her voice soft and slow, "today was a big day." Timmy nodded fast, his eyes wide. "Yeah," he said. "You're a cop, Mom." "A secret cop? And you caught Linda?" He still couldn't believe it. His mom, the quiet lady who made him pancakes, was a hero with a badge. Sarah smiled, but it was a thinking smile now, not just a happy one. "Yep," she said. "But it's more than that. See, sometimes the person you think is powerless. They're the one holding all the cards." She paused, letting her words sink in. Timmy tilted his head, his eyebrows scrunching up. "What do you mean?" he asked, kicking a pebble off the step. Sarah pointed at herself, then at him. "Look at us," she said. "Linda thought I was just a boring mom. She thought you were just a noisy kid. She didn't think we could do anything big. She thought she was the boss, the one with all the power. But she was wrong." Timmy's eyes got bigger as he listened. "You had a badge," he said. "And you were watching her the whole time." Sarah nodded. "Exactly," she said. "I looked quiet, but I was strong. And you? Your plane started it all." Timmy grinned, looking at the blue plane's path in his mind. "It did, huh?" he said. "I didn't know it would be so important." Sarah laughed again, pulling him close with one arm. "Sometimes little things turn into big things," she said. "You threw that plane, and it showed everyone who Linda really was. You helped me finish my job." They sat there, the sky turning purple now, the stars twinkling brighter. Sarah's words made Timmy feel big inside, like he'd done something special without even trying. He leaned against her, his head on her shoulder. "So, people who look weak can be strong?" he asked, his voice quiet. Sarah nodded, her chin resting on his hair. "Yep," she said. "The ones you don't notice. They might surprise you. They might have secrets, like me. Or they might just be brave, like you." Timmy thought about that, his fingers playing with a loose thread on his shorts. He remembered how scared he'd been when Linda yelled, how he thought they were in trouble. But his mom wasn't scared, she was ready. She had a plan all along. And him? He didn't run away. He stayed, even when it got loud. Maybe he was strong too, in his own way. Sarah looked out at the neighborhood, her eyes soft but sharp. "And then there's the other side," she said. "People like Linda, ones who pick fights over little things. They yell and boss everyone around, thinking they're big and tough. But they don't see the payback coming." Timmy giggled a little. "She didn't see you coming, Mom," he said. Sarah grinned. "Nope," she said. "She thought a paper plane was her big problem. But the real problem? It was her. And it caught up with her." The night got darker, the air cooler, and the crickets started chirping in the grass. Timmy picked up one of his old planes, a red one with bent wings, and twirled it in his hands. "She was mean," he said. "Yelling at everybody, making rules. But you stopped her." Sarah nodded, her smile warm. "We stopped her together," she said. "You, me, and that plane. Sometimes it takes a team to fix things." They sat quiet for a minute, just listening to the night. The stars were all out now, a big blanket of sparkles over Oakwood Hills. The houses glowed with yellow lights, and a dog barked far away. It felt safe, like the world was back the way it should be. Linda was gone, her yelling was over, and the neighborhood could breathe again. Sarah had made it happen, but she didn't brag. She just sat there with Timmy, happy to be his mom. "So, what do you think, Timmy?" she asked, nudging him with her elbow. "Ever meet someone who surprised you?" Timmy scrunched his face, thinking hard. "Yeah," he said. "You. I didn't know you were a cop." Sarah laughed loud, her voice bouncing off the porch. "Fair enough," she said. "But what about other people? Someone you thought was small or quiet, but they turned out big and brave. Timmy tapped his chin, his eyes squinting. Maybe Jenny, he said. She's little, but she wasn't scared of Linda. She hugged you and called you a hero. Sarah nodded, impressed. That's a good one, she said. Jenny's tough. Little doesn't mean weak. Timmy grinned. And you're not weak either, Mom, he said. You're the strongest. Sarah hugged him tight, her arms warm around his shoulders. Thanks, buddy, she said. But you're strong too. Don't forget that. Timmy hugged her back, his face buried in her shirt. He felt big and small at the same time, big because he helped, small because he was still just a kid. But with Sarah, it didn't matter. They were a team, and that made everything okay. The porch light flicked on, buzzing soft above them. Sarah stood up, stretching her arms. Come on, she said, holding out her hand. Let's go inside. It's getting late. Timmy took her hand, jumping up fast. Can we make more planes tomorrow? He asked, his voice bouncy. Sarah smiled big. You bet, she said. Big ones, little ones, all the planes you want. They walked inside, the screen door banging shut behind them. The kitchen was warm, the table still messy with crayons and paper from Timmy's plane making. Sarah turned off the porch light, and the yard went dark, just the stars left to shine. The paper planes stayed outside, scattered like little treasures, proof of a day that changed everything. Here's the thing, folks, life's full of surprises. Sometimes the person you think can't do much. They're the one holding all the cards, ready to win when nobody expects it. Like Sarah, quiet and sneaky, with a badge in her pocket. Or Timmy, a kid with a plane, starting something huge without even knowing. And the ones who pick fights over silly stuff like Linda with her roses and rules. They don't see the big payback coming. They trip over their own meanness, and the quiet ones rise up. So, what do you think? Ever underestimate someone who turned out amazing? Maybe a friend, a teacher, even yourself? Someone who looked small but acted big? Tell me about it, I want to know. Life's like a paper plane, you don't know how far it'll fly till you throw it. So keep folding, keep throwing, and fly high out there. You might surprise everyone, even yourself.